Hey, welcome to Dear SQL DBA, a podcast and YouTube show for SQL Server developers and database administrators. I'm Kendra Little. This is episode number 33, and I am not really secretly, pre-recording this episode because I am going to be on the road heading to Portugal to teach a pre-con and 2 regular sessions at SQL Saturday Portugal. And then I'm going to hang out on the Algarve coast. It's going to be a great time. Yesterday, there were still seats left in Kaylin Delaney's pre-con. I'm teaching on Thursday next week, and then she's teaching a class on Friday. I love getting to go to other people's classes and trainings. This one is a full day on Hackathon. Kaylin has recently, if you haven't had a chance to see this class, which it's going to be my first time, but she recently published a white paper on in-memory technology in SQL Server. So if you'd like to get some of the Hackathon goodness, search for Kaylin Delaney white paper in memory, and I bet you will find that. Should be really fun day, and I bet the white paper is good too. I've looked over it, but I haven't had a chance to read it in detail yet. And I was like, Kaylin could explain it all to me, right? So it's gonna be great. I still have freebies up at SQLworkbooks.com. You can enroll for free right now in troubleshooting blocking and deadlocks for beginners and in tuning problem queries in table partitioning. The way it's set up, if you enroll now, you get an enrollment in the course through the end of 2017. So get on over there and get into those courses. Really excited to get reviews on tuning problem queries in table partitioning. That is a total new material that I've written recently, and I had really fun time making it, so I'm interested to hear what folks think of the demos and of the class. Today's topic for the podcast is happening right now. Dear SQL DBA, I saw a Twitter conversation recently about stack dumps. What is that, and is there any way I can be prepared if I ever have one? Presumably on my SQL server. I guess you could have a stack. There have been times when I feel like my brain may have had a stack dump. And I have to admit, there is just something really funny about the word stack dump. It takes me back when I worked at Microsoft. I wasn't actually supporting SQL Server. I was supporting a database that was actually developed in-house and used in-house. It had a transaction log. It was a relational database, and it was really interesting getting to work on it. There's a small development team that would support it and add features. And when things would go wrong with performance, because it was really critical application, when things would go wrong with performance or availability, I was on the ops team, and we would need to use a debugger to break into the process and take a dump of the file. And there was no written process for this. So there was one time when things were going wrong, like there were some big performance issues with one team using this. And we needed to get information about the state of the database when this happened. So there was a conference call with a couple of the developers and our team. And the conference call was all about how to take a dump. Now, one of the fantastic things about my team at Microsoft, one of my happiest memories of my team there, is that it was this very cool team of super smart people from around the world. So on our team, we had people from Bangladesh and Iran and Nigeria and Mexico and India. And then there was someone who was from Washington State in the United States. He was actually local. And then I'm from Texas, which is kind of like another country. I like to say that we were a fully international team. We even had the country of Texas represented. And the developer who was on the call with us was from Russia. And I think that the phrase taking a dump is not nearly as funny to everyone around the world. This was a very serious conference call, and it was a very technical discussion. And the way it was laid out, a bunch of us were all in our own offices. And this was all going down at like 5:30 or 6 p.m. A lot of people in the building had left. Our team was still there. But at one point during the call, because the call was about how to get ready to take a dump, and then how to take a dump, and then how to start cleaning up from taking a dump. And at the point where we were receiving very technical instructions on how to clean up from taking a dump, I had to actually mute my phone because like a 12-year-old, I was just howling in laughter. I just couldn't take the conversation, and tears were streaming down my face, and I started kind of gasping for breath, and I could hear down the hall the other person from the United States was doing the same thing. And we weren't laughing at anyone else on the call. We were really just sort of laughing at our own immaturity and our own just inability to talk about this subject. But I did receive very technical training on how to properly take a dump with WinDBG of that particular database process. And we were successfully able to capture information that led to the problem being resolved. It was a very successful dump. So I'm going to try to not, now that I've gone through my juvenile humor, and try to not return there for the rest of the podcast. I thought maybe I should just tell that story and try to get it out. So what about SQL Server? You shouldn't normally have to connect to SQL Server and break into the process and take a dump of the SQL Server process. You can. You are definitely going to interfere with performance and availability. When you do that, it's going to freeze up for the time you're doing it. And if you don't clean up properly, I mean, the reason we were getting such detailed instructions is if you don't do it properly, you'll take the whole thing down. So you'll at least interrupt. But you can do that on a test instance. What I'm talking about today, though, with the stack dumps are when something happens in the SQL Server that goes wrong, and you hit something that is such a severe error, and maybe it's a problem in the code, or maybe you've hit something bad like corruption, but it's so bad that SQL Server actually throws a stack dump. You're not, breaking in with a debugger. You have just run into a problem that is severe enough that SQL Server generates that dump. And I thought it would be fun for this episode to talk about a bug that I found a while back. That I wasn't the first one to find it, but I did find it on my own. I found an issue where when you run DBCC page against a table that has a filtered index on it, SQL Server doesn't return the results you expect. It's specifically when you run DBCC page with a format of 3. The DBCC page command is undocumented by Microsoft, but it is well known. And you have several different, you're saying, I want to see the contents of this page. And in this case, there's different ways it can present the output of the content to you. In this case, you're saying, I want this format 3 to return, which for an index page will show you like a table result. And you'll see in the column headings, some of the information you'll see will actually be what is the real key and include columns in the index. I was putting together this for a demo, and it worked fine for all these tables, but I would run DBCC page against this one table, and even with format style 3, I wouldn't get the table output. I would get some output. I wasn't getting an error. And then I was like, why isn't it working for this table? And my instance is acting a little funny. Eventually, I looked in the SQL Server log, the error log, and I saw a bunch of stack dumps. I did some searching, and I found a bug had been filed. Let's see. It was filed by Luciano Moreira. I'm sorry for probably mangling your name. And it said, hey, when I run DBCC page against a table with a filtered index with format 3, I get stack dumps and not the correct output, which was what I'd run into. This was on SQL Server 2012. I tried it this week against SQL Server 2016, and the bug isn't closed as fixed, but it did get fixed somewhere along the way because the command works fine in SQL Server 2016. No stack dump in the log, and it gives me the correct output on a table with filtered index. It still happens against SQL Server 2014, though. I was like, okay, well, how about 2014? I did have a 2014 instance round. So I put a comment on the bug just in case anyone's looking at it like, hey, I think this has been fixed. But I did want to show some screenshots, and I have a quick video of what this looks like when it's happening on 2014. Now, if you're listening to the audio-only version of this, I'll talk you through the video. It's not compelling film. I mean, I think it's interesting, but you'll get the gist of it. What I did is I started up a load test just against my little SQL Server 2014 VM using ostress.exe, just so I had some activity running against the instance, because what I do while the stress test is running is I have a window open with just perfmon counters, just showing basic like CPU on the instance and then batch requests to sec on the instance. I have 3 threads running in the load test, so I'm not overwhelming the CPU, but I have it pretty consistently high. Then in Management Studio, in the other half of the window, I run DBCC page periodically. So I'm going to start up the video and my load test begins. My processor time is hanging out around 75, around 80. And I've got about 6 batch requests a second going. It periodically drops down to 3 just naturally. It's not always at 6. When I run the DBCC page command that causes the stack dump, you can see that processor spikes up to like around 95% briefly and then drops back down. Every time I run DBCC page, it's not always above 90, but it always spikes up and it's pretty noticeable and repeatable. It definitely has an impact on performance. In this case, just for sort of a small thing that's happening. And in this point, I'm stopping my trace file, and you can see in this SQL Server error log lots of information about the stack dump. It has a signature for the stack dump and then a whole lot of just sort of things you can't interpret. If you scroll down and look through the short stack dump, eventually in there you will see commands that you can recognize. Things like what was the input buffer that was running when this stack dump occurred. Now, you're going to have to scroll a lot. Keep an eye on the timestamps because the whole stack dump has the same timestamp. In this case, you can see the DBCC page command that caused this, and it says this is an access violation that occurred. And it says, hey, well, yeah, we pretty much had to terminate the process. It wasn't apparent in my Management Studio window that the process was being terminated. A file with the dump information is also stored on your operating system in the log folder for MS SQL log. There's text files with the dump, and they're SQL dump and then numbers. I have a lot of SQL dump files on this test VM because I've done a lot of things like corrupting indexes on purpose. If you open those files, you can see things like what was the memory load on the server when this stack dump was thrown, also that input buffer. So that's a portable version of the file. If things roll out of your SQL Server error log, then you have that file as well. Again, a lot of the information in there isn't really readable to a human being. We do get, in this case, a little bit of DBCC page output itself in the file, which is kind of interesting. In that folder, along with the text files, There are also crash dump files. They'll be of different sizes. Some dump files are like 11 megs. In this case, they're small dump files. But when you open a support ticket, you can send that file along. So they're in a way that you can easily copy them off of the server and submit them with a support file. I have seen cases where, in this case, you can see the CPU spike. But in this case, it didn't cause the batch request to pause for a long time. The impact of a stack dump is going to vary depending on what's going on that's causing the stack dump. So for example, one case, there was corruption in a full text index. And every time it was this was hard to fix because of the size of the full text index. Every time a read would go against that part of the index, the SQL Server instance, which was a very busy instance, would effectively freeze up for 30 seconds to a minute. Like, it was super noticeable that it was essentially frozen. Depending on what's happening too, the stack dump could be part of a crash. If you're having a SQL Server that is crashing, you do want to look at places like the Windows Server event log and see information about it there, but also in the SQL Server error log, you want to see if there was a crash dump file associated with the crash as well. So impact from this can be, like in my case, this demo was pretty light with just spiking in the CPU, but it could, of course, be far, far more severe depending on what's triggering the stack dump. You can tell if you're like, well, wow, how do I tell if it's corruption? When you're looking through the information from the dump, if it is something like corruption, there is a very good chance that you're going to see a message in there about corruption. If the corruption was detected while CheckDB was running, for example, you will see the checkDB command, which may tell you exactly what database it's in just from the input buffer that it saw. The most important thing to remember about stack dumps really is they are things that you should respond to immediately. This is not something you should ignore. At the top of the file, it says, please return this file, the query or program that produced the bug check, and the database and the error log, and any other pertinent information with a service request. I think that this text may have been written before we had, 100 terabyte databases. You do want to look through it first and see, okay, what is going on? Is this corruption? Is this something, a DBCC page command? What is this? And is it something that I can respond to myself? Or is it something I should open a ticket for? Lots of folks actually don't know what it costs to open a ticket with Microsoft support. I checked currently on Microsoft's support page, they publish their pricing for business. For professional support, for one incident from start to finish, it is a flat $4.99 US for that incident. You can currently buy a 5-pack for $19.99, so just under $2,000 for a 5-pack, and they will help from start to finish of the incident. And the way they have an incident defined, this includes functionality that's not working as it's intended for products. So this includes things like stack dump. A lot of folks think it's going to be much more expensive and it's going to be like an hourly rate. Even if it takes them a long time to find it, it's going to be a flat rate. If this is a problem that you believe is a bug and you're seeing it in development, like if you don't need current support, let's say you're testing something and you start seeing stack dumps when you're testing a feature, you can file a bug on connect.microsoft.com to report that. And really, I encourage you to report that, it's good for everyone. And it might not be immediate, but you'll get follow up on that and feedback. And a lot of times these bugs get fixed. Like the one I showed you actually is fixed in SQL Server 2016, even though that isn't a supported command. DBCC page is technically not a supported command, but still got fixed, which is really cool. Thank you, Microsoft, for fixing that. I had to go back to 2014 to even be able to get that to work or to not work, depending on how you see it. Thanks so much for joining me for Dear SQL DBA for this episode. If you've got a question, submit it at littlekendra.com/dearsqldba. And don't forget that you can still sign up and enroll in free courses over at SQLworkbooks.com. I'm Kendra Little, and I'll talk to you again soon.